All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. This is Jordan Smart here. Today, I'm gonna be hosting Affirmative Interaction. We have here, of course, Michael Nixon, Adrian Marston, Logan Stout, Christian Hayes, and we have a special guest here, Christian, and he will be helping us tackle this topic of misinformation and disinformation. These are two things that have been very much been a big part of our world, our country, and our politics since I would say 2016. And I definitely think I'm getting a little bit of echo here. Headphones are in. Just give me 1 second.
It's all good, man. We're very informal here. Our viewers are used to this. It's okay.
All right, so just bear with me. I'm in a very spacey apartment, apparently. So we're just going to be tackling the topic of misinformation and disinformation. Again, these are two things that since 2016 have been a really big talking point in our country. We want to provide some information to you all and help break this down and create a conversation that's beneficial and that is timely, of course. So we know everyone here other than Christian. So Christian, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your story. Oh, Christian, you're muted.
Yeah. My fault. All right, here we go. Well, thank you so much for having me on this gathering online show, or I don't know how you call it. But and Michael, thank you for the invitation. I hear that I'm the first guest that this show has had, so
you are. No
honored. Hopefully, I won't disappoint, and I'll try to make you all proud. But thank you so much again for having me. And just as a bit of background, I am a journalist. I have written for many publications, but I'm also a lawyer. I went to law school, unfortunately, and I don't like to tell people I'm a lawyer, so I kind of keep that part of my resume hidden from folks. I just tell them I'm a journalist who writes about the law, because that's really what I focus on. Right now, I work at the Knight Institute. The full name of the institute is the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, and basically that is a center housed within the university that deals with freedom of speech and association, especially in the digital era. Whenever the government tramples on anyone's freedom to associate, or even if the government goes snooping on journalists who do a lot of their work online, whenever the government does anything to just basically quash your freedoms in the digital space, that's where the Knight Institute comes in. They like to sue people. I don't personally sue anyone. I just write about the lawsuits, but yeah, that's what they do. And it's really cool to just be in a place where folks just care about our liberties, especially as they relate to people that are marginalized. In my particular case, I'm working on a project called the Border and First Amendment Project. And basically, I'm studying all the ways in which the Trump administration or the US government more generally is cracking down on immigrant communities, immigrant rights activists, on journalists who are covering migration. And I've just uncovered a lot of things, a lot of ways in which the government doesn't even want, for example, judges who adjudicate or who decide immigration cases to speak publicly. They have a gag order essentially on all immigration judges, because immigration judges are know a lot about how the law works, and they're almost intimidated by their independence, and so basically they don't want them speaking. And so it's a very kind of nice job that allows me to write and think about what's happening today. And before this, and just to make a long story short, I've just written for a whole bunch of people, most notably the New York Times. I used to be on the editorial board of the Times, writing about the Supreme Court and many other issues. And I've written for New York Magazine, for HuffPost, for the New Yorker, you name it, just Google my name. Or if you ever would like to chat about any of things that I've written, if you find an error in one of my articles, reach out to me. But yeah, so I'm a nerd about legal issues and anything dealing with just kind of how the law and politics intersect in very messy ways. And God knows that they're very much intersected at this point in time, including now that we're dealing with COVID-19 and we're dealing with just all the questions about how our civil rights and liberties even matter in this time. Like the fact that we can't leave our houses because there's a public health emergency, that raises civil liberties questions that we never thought were possible. That you can't leave your house. That's huge. So there are legitimate questions today, and who knows how they're gonna get resolved. But right now they're very much real, and they're playing out in the courts. And let's just hope that we can all survive this moment, and I think we will, so long as we with the right degree of suspicion, just listen to what the government says, but also, with our eyes open and being very discerning about the things that are being put out there. Because as the topic for today indicates, people are very prone to falling for misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories. And if we're misinformed or disinformed about the state of the world, the Bible says, the people perish due to a lack of knowledge. So people could die if you don't, know what's truth and what isn't. So anyway, hopefully that was a good intro.
Indeed, it was. So we're just going to get straight into it. Thank you for sharing, Cristian. I'm just going to lay down the foundation of the definitions that we have here. And misinformation is defined as false information that is spread, regardless of whether there was an intent to mislead. And disinformation follows as false information that is spread, regardless of whether there is intent to mislead or not. I
was reading those too, and they sounded similar.
This is when copy and paste doesn't come in handy. So disinformation is actually when false information is disseminated intentionally as a way to mislead, as a way to spread propaganda. And now I'll never forget the definition ever again. So
the definition was misinformation, or
exactly. It was all part of the plan. That's it. Okay, so we really want to tackle and see how mis/disinformation. Well, first, even before we get into that, Cristian, how do you see these definitions similar and different? What is in the real world? What is a way for people to really be able to pull these definitions aside and really understand the difference between the two? Because I can understand how this could be confusing to someone that's new to the conversation.
Sure, absolutely. I think the word that most people are familiar with, like say you were born in the year 2016, all you know is 2016 and nothing after that. Misinformation is the word that everyone knows. That's just falsehoods. That's just things that they could be intentionally spread or not, but it's anything that is not true that is spread for the purpose of, maybe misleading, maybe not, but it's just not true. That's the reason websites like Snopes.com exist, because of misinformation on the web. That website goes back a long time, even before our crazy times. And whenever you would have a question about, is this story true or not, you would just go to Snopes.com, and that's how you find out if that chain email that got sent out, and people may not know what chain emails are, but yeah, these are forward emails that some of the older folks among us, including me, used to get back in the day with, it could be crazy stories or prayer chains, so many things. That's misinformation. But something happened in 2016 that many people weren't used to, or that was very new to us as a nation. And what happened in 2016 was that there was a nation state called Russia that took misinformation and then weaponized it against the American public. And of course, that in itself, we didn't know it at the time, but thanks to a huge investigation by Robert Mueller and the Department of Justice and a few indictments that were brought down in the legal system, we learned that specific actors, paid actors, government officials, even people here in the US were unwittingly used for the purposes of spreading misinformation with the aim of ripping apart the American electorate. The reason the election came down the way it did, it was for several factors. Many people rightfully didn't like any of the candidates, but also because a lot of people were honestly discouraged from voting. This is information that we'll never know for sure if what Russia did in 2016 tipped the election in favor of one candidate or the other. But one thing's for certain, and this is established truth and no one can question it, and that is everyone agrees that Russia played a role in dividing Americans and using Facebook, using Instagram, using YouTube, using channels that we use every day to just flood the zone, as they say, with just stuff about Hillary, about Jews, about Blacks, about Latinos, about immigrants. And if Donald Trump already had a very odious message, they took all of that and they amplified it even more on social media. And people started sharing it. Accounts online on Twitter were created for the purpose of posing as American citizens to just divide and mislead and share fake news. That's another term that was coined in 2016 that wasn't a thing before. And as a result of all of that, now this new word arose after 2016, which is disinformation. And that is when you knowingly and willfully use falsehoods and you spread it, now knowing that that information is going to have an effect on people. And that's a very new thing. That's a new thing that now in 2020, we have to be very cognizant of and very mindful, because if we're not, we're going to fall for it. And as a matter of fact, already, because it's an election year, because a lot is at stake in November, a lot of folks, even candidates, are going to take advantage of that, and they're going.
Did we lose him?
We may have temporarily. Uh-oh.
Ooh,
There he is. He's back.
Hey,
There
he's
you
back.
go.
All right. Well, I hope you could hear most of what I just said.
It was just like the last few seconds there. Just pick back.
All right, cool. Yeah, and as I was saying, because it's the 2020 election, I think now more than at any other time, because so much at stake, a lot of storylines, a lot of old divisions, a lot of just these fault lines in American society along voting rights, along education, along abortion rights, along gun rights. A lot of all of these quote unquote culture wars are going to just, all these evil actors are just gonna drive a train through it or a truck through it, and they're going to, try to make it blow up in our faces. And I just combined like 10 analogies there. Probably didn't make any sense. But,
no, it makes sense. It makes sense. I did want to say, we actually had some of the examples, I think, from 2016. The DOJ released this document. Facebook obviously turned over some of the ads that the IRA used in 2016 to deceive those disinformation ads. So you could probably click ad one. I think that, not the metadata. Just right above that. Yeah. This is one of Bernie Sanders as a as a hero, as seen as like being depicted.
Feel the burn.
Like literally. But honestly, Cristian, like as I was going through a few more of these, you see how this information is used to kind of increase like polarization. It's like it's a tool of like polarization, I think, more than anything. There's some really really sad ones in there, but obviously, can you talk a little bit about how, like you mentioned it, but how did they use this in 2016? I think to polarize is what I'm kind of still trying to figure out.
Sure, absolutely. Just to use one subgroup of examples, because again, you focus on some screenshots there that look at Bernie Sanders and gay rights, but to take the subject of Black Lives Matter or racial equality, unfortunately, this nation has been a nation that since time immemorial, since its very beginning, was founded on just notions of white supremacy, one race being superior than others, and Russia knows this, and one of my former employers, her name is Charlotte Eiffel. She's the president and director of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, not to be confused with the NAACP. The Legal Defense Fund is separate. That's where Thurgood Marshall used to work. I was honored to work there for a little bit. But one thing that she likes to say, and she has told me personally, she says, Cristian, one thing that Russia knows about us is that racism is a national security threat. That racism, it is such a flashpoint in American society that even outsiders, people that are not Americans, know that we're divided along these lines. So they're going to use any means necessary to divide us even more on that point. It's a national security threat in the sense that if we're not protected internally, anyone can come in and just wreak havoc among us. And so anything that separates us, that polarizes us, as you said earlier, whether it's LGBT rights, race relations, police brutality,
abortion, immigration,
et cetera. Exactly. All of those things. Unfortunately, even though we're a value-laden society, these are issues where politics plays a huge role, and we're divided in two camps, left or right. You're either for those things or against those things. It's very hard to toe the line or to just have a sensible middle point. And because others know that those are our points of division, they will use ads that amplify those things to drive us further apart. And so necessarily the goal is not to get you to vote for Trump or to get you to vote for Joe Biden. The point is for us to hate each other's guts, you know what I mean? And by hating each other's guts, we're disgusted with everything, and we didn't even go to vote, you know what I mean? Because you say, oh, they're all the same, I'm not even gonna bother, and that's exactly what they want. That's how they want to suppress your vote, by not getting to go to the polls in the first place, because they want you to think that everyone is the same, that they're all corrupt, and that
they're all the same,
and that you shouldn't even take part of any of it, because by taking part of it, you're legitimizing the whole thing. And if they get you to not vote, then mission accomplished. They have effectively, the Russians or whoever else has effectively suppressed your vote because you fell for exactly what they wanted you to fall for.
Man, I wanted to tag on to part of the question that Garrison asked. I read a very, in some ways, disturbing article surrounding this topic, and it was centered specifically around that 2015 to 17 time frame. And they focused a lot of their attention where, like you said, we placed so much emphasis on Facebook, but so many of these Russian hacks and attacks were on things like Google, they were on Instagram, they were on Twitter, they're on YouTube with the type of suggestions that you see on your YouTube feed. And I think one of the things that really frightened me was when they broke down the amount of interaction some of these like Russian bots were getting on these social media platforms. They gave some examples of even some of the more polarizing conversations that we were having, like Colin Kaepernick, and you had Russian Twitter accounts that were posting things on both sides of the spectrum here, where whether it was hashtag Tiffany or hashtag, respect the flag. And you would have tens of thousands of people on either side of the spectrum interacting with these social media accounts, and they have no idea who they're interacting or what they're contributing to. I guess my question would be is, when it comes to these polarizing topics that will always come up, what is the safest way to engage in these conversations on social media? Because I think that's part of the danger, where I've been shared things, and there is some slight concern that, like, all right, is this someone trolling? Is it a hack? Is it a real person? Like, now these questions are constantly being thrown up in the air, and I'm not really sure what is the appropriate way to navigate on social media now, because we don't know what is real or not.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing up that distinction at the beginning of your intervention, which was that, yeah, maybe 2016 and 17 was all about Facebook and Twitter, maybe a little bit of Instagram, but Facebook is all news now for these more sophisticated actors. Now you have TikTok, you have, Snapchat. There's some of them that honestly I don't use and I don't even know how to use, but I see the content, and I'm on Twitter all the time. And yeah, it's what is true about this upcoming election, and sorry to come back to the election subject, because the main goal of any foreign actor wanting to interfere with our self-determination, our self-governance, our right to vote, is to not get you to vote. And so anything that accomplishes that goal, they're gonna turn to those tactics. And one thing that personally, I would do, and this is just purely on a personal level, because you have personal things that we could do, but there are also structural things that we can demand from these platforms, and that government also should demand from these platforms, because they're the government. They're the ones who should be regulating some of these spaces. And I know that there are First Amendment concerns as well, because we all have a right to express ourselves. Right. But whenever there are foreign actors or nation states doing this stuff, we all agree that the freedom of speech is different. It shouldn't apply to those actors. But yeah, as far as the personal, how do you protect yourself from that? Well, the first thing is just to be well read. If you're just a person who shares memes thoughtlessly, or who just kind of uses social media for entertainment purposes, perhaps you may be more prone to sharing things that aren't true. And now that images are so easy to manipulate, videos or deepfakes are things that are now happening. I don't know if you saw, but the president of the United States shared a doctor video of Joe Biden a couple of days ago, sticking his tongue out or something. So when you see even the leader of the free world spreading wild things online, or retweeting things that other people tweet at him, of course, crazy. You have to be mindful. And if you know that the U.S. president is the kind of person that shares information like that, that to avoid the content even in his own feed, it's a crazy thing to say, but you have to almost identify who are the bad actors from the legitimate ones, and I personally, you're not going to believe this, I have Trump blocked on my Twitter feed. I don't want to see his tweets. If I need to see something for work purposes, it's a little hard when you block someone. You have to take an extra few steps to read, but I do it because, again, I work in news, and because I know that everyone's going to be retweeting his content onto my feed. I don't want to see 95% of it. So, I just haven't blocked, and it's good both from a mental health. It also helps me to not be in a blinding rage for half of the day. So yeah, if there's particular kind of content or people or actors, because we all know who the Candace Owenses of the world are, and who all these other, So
finally some truth to the conversation.
So we know who these people are. So I think a self-protective thing we could do is just to, honestly, if it's not going to help the discourse, just block them, and encourage others to do the same, because again, it helps a lot. It cleans up your social media experience, and if you're a consumer of news, as I am, it also kind of makes your life easier. Now, and
so I'm sorry. I just want to cut in, because I know we're running out of time. I wanted to make sure we did jump into present day in terms of COVID-19 and how dis and misinformation is affecting the response to this pandemic. what long-lasting effects these terrible ways of communicating are going to be, felt well into the future, and how we personally can respond to it. So I know you're talking to Adrian a little bit about how we can better understand information, how we can do more to protect ourselves. So you can start there and maybe work your way back in terms of how do we do this in the context of COVID-19.
Sure. So as far as timing, real quick, we can go a few extra minutes. If I have to hop off, I'll let you know. So let's just keep talking.
Cool, great.
Perfect.
Yeah, I was telling a journalist last week during an interview that if COVID-19 has done something to our public discourse and our ability to talk to each other, is that those fault lines that I was talking about a few moments ago, all those things that are polarizing in American society, they've become even more pronounced now in this day and age, because there's the added fear of the economy, of the fact that many of us can move around freely, of the fact that, we may have cabin fever because we're indoors so much. As a society, we may be becoming more paranoid about just things that are happening in the world, and with good reason. It's a very scary time to live in right now. That cannot be denied. But even more so for that reason, we have to be extremely more cautious about the things that we read, the information that we consume, and whom we turn to for our information. Because even I've had family members who tell me, Cristian, I don't know whom to believe these days, and I don't know, who I should turn to, and so they may be looking to us for guidance and for reassurance. And if your family members are people of faith, which I assume they are, I would first and foremost just tell people, do not, above anything else, do not give in to a spirit of fear, because the minute you do that, you just open yourself up to all other kinds of mischief, and you just become a target. The reality is that Christians, believers, are more prone to falling for disinformation, misinformation, conspiracy theories, and the like. Even though in theory, Christians should be the ones who shouldn't be moved by these things. They should be, more centered and kind of be able to be a light and a guide to other people who don't have, the knowledge of God and Christ in their lives. So first and foremost, do not give in to the spirit of fear. And I know that may sound easier said than done, again, because of everything that's going on. But if there's someone who truly faced scary situations in life, it was Jesus himself. So he's a person who did not waver when other people left them all alone. And yeah, he felt fear. He felt like he was abandoned, but he never let go of that truth that he held on to. So first and foremost, that's the most important thing above anything else. And of course, after that is following the guidelines from your local government. I do not deny that people have a right to question the government, to protest. I mean, I work for a First Amendment organization. You should have that right to always, second guess what the government feeds you. But at the same time, we are, if anything, we are called to be sensible, to not just make it worse for folks. And the reason why, more than anyone, we should be the ones just try to, not to be sidelined or to be quiet, but just to be more measured in the way we share or talk about these things, is that if you don't, and if you just fall for all the nonsense that's out there, the talking about the Wuhan virus, or the fact that this was created as a bioweapon in a lab, or that 5G networks are the reason why COVID-19 exists. I'm telling you, there's so many crazy conspiracy theories out there. If you become a party to that, is that more than anything, that affects your witness to others, and people will think that your faith and your religion is a joke, and they won't even want any part of it because you're the one that's sounding like a crazy person. So if anything, you need to protect the way you interact and talk to others, because you don't want the ultimate message that you stand for to suffer. So yeah, I guess that's my answer to your question.
What is that when you think through that conversation? Because I agree with you. I resonate a lot with what you're saying, but there is this other side that exists within our framework, and we say, like, be careful not to believe conspiracy theories, or be careful not to believe, this idea of fake or misinformation or fake news. But we have a literal leader of our country that pushes this narrative. I mean, some of the stuff, and the thing about Trump that's so intriguing to me is that one day he's all about his base. He's all about making sure he makes someone feel like they're cared for. And so he'll tell them to protest, and then he'll get mad at Georgia for talking about reopening, all in the same breath, because he knows that the protesters will stick with them in this, and then the other group will as well, and so on and so forth. He just wants people to stay encouraged and happy. And you talk about, kind of staying clear of this, but how do you feel that we should kind of navigate through? My Facebook feed is full of people that actually believe some of the conspiracies. They believe that maybe this was created in a biolab. They believe that the government doesn't have the right to do this. They believe that they're doing it to spread a new world order, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's really easy for us to say, hey, don't believe conspiracy theories, but we literally have maybe not a whole party, but a lot of conservative lawmakers that are pushing some of these same ideas right into the public space and public spectrum. How do you feel is the best way to navigate through that and make people feel that you don't dislike them or their opinions, but maybe that they're kind of buying into something that's actually created to harm them or to lie to them, to misinform them?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I'm going to be honest, because even people that I know and that I respect, and even people that I've interacted with on a personal level, I've seen some of that commentary, and I've seen, the sharing of some of these ideas, and it's disheartening. It's disheartening because these are people with whom you have broken bread with. These are people that, outside of this crazy time that we're in, they're really lovely, normal people. They're people who, you hope that you can continue sharing life with, and hopefully you're walking together towards a common goal, and in a sense, I would just try to remind everyone, and I know it's again it's harder said than done, that just sometimes you just have to tell people that the internet is not real life, that everything you see and hear on the internet is not true, and maybe for the sake of their own sanity and everyone else, just to log off and go take a long walk, because honestly, because honestly, it's or just go back to sharing pictures of your dog or kids, just things that are totally harmless. Because in the
That's
end,
my new line. Hey, could you post your dog next time?
Yeah, can you go back to that? Can you go back to that? And again, going back to the topic of self-care and just not going crazy, it's okay. You don't have to unfriend some of these people on Facebook, but you can block them and do other things so that they don't know that you don't see their content.
Oh yeah, mute them, mute their content,
mute them, etc.
It's necessary sometimes.
I got a long mute list, that's for sure.
Yeah, and it's not to be disrespectful. Again, a lot of it also can be generational. Unfortunately, depending on how old you are, you may be more prone to misinformation. I know my mom shares crazy things on WhatsApp. In South America, my family's from South America. They love WhatsApp. Anyway, I get lots of messages on WhatsApp from my mom, and I have to tell her, Mom, this is not real. You shouldn't be sharing this. Please stop. I tell her, and she listens to me, and she agrees. And I'm not always successful, but sometimes you just have to speak truth into people, and especially if you have a close relationship with them, don't be afraid to knock some sense into them. And if you do it with the right spirit, you'll be surprised. They might be more receptive than if you just kept your mouth shut and didn't say anything. So, hey, maybe, especially if there's someone for whose health and spiritual well-being you care about, maybe you're just called to talk to them and approach them in a very in a very respectful but Christ-centered way.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on that, Christian. I totally agree. I have family members who also share some very, very, like wild stuff that's just not true. I've had a literal argument with a family member who believes that 5G is to blame for the coronavirus, for COVID-19. So it's just crazy. It's crazy. But, I think what I learned in some of these conversations is that, like, this is a symptom of some deeper, more foundational, I guess, epistemological issues of like how you know what you know. And I think when you have this apocalyptic end time worldview, like most of our viewers, most of our friends and family members who are Seventh-day Adventists would have, you try to fit everything into this apocalyptic lens or this apocalyptic category where every single thing is somehow playing into this ultimate like mark of the beast or like, New World Order. And so people capitalize off of that. Like they take that fervor and that Christian propensity towards conspiracy and distrust of government, and they capitalize off of it by sharing what I believe to be little bits of like misinformation or disinformation to undermine people's like contact points with reality. I mean, I just read recently, I don't know about you guys, but I got the email or I got the call and text message from friends who all of them somehow had an auntie or an uncle or a cousin who worked at the Pentagon or the Department of Homeland Security and CDC, and they were all made aware on this inside information that, a couple days from now, the government's going to shut down and like everything's going to, martial law is going to be enacted. And I just read an article saying that was China. It was China acting to distribute that information. And so many, I can't tell you how many people called me and texted me that piece of disinformation. And thankfully, like technology, and thankfully technology is getting better where like we can kind of track those things and get that information out within a few weeks. And now we know what to look out for. But so many people were stirred into a fervor, which now other bad actors can capitalize off of and say this and undermine this thing and that thing's a lie and that thing's a lie. So it's tough because there's so many things coming at us at once.
Yeah. Totally. My mom shared a picture, I think, from Texas with some ladies showing a sign saying that the vaccine will be a chip and I will not accept it or something like that. And again, and again, that kind of dovetails and kind of works right with what you just said, that we have this, end times perspective on issues, and the fact that the vaccine might be a chip, kind of plays right into that, and that whoever gets the chip gets cured, and if you don't, sorry or whatever. Anyway, so yeah, it's really sad, and it really makes you think, and more than anything, for people that know better, when they see the believing world sharing these things, again, it harms the ultimate message, and it's just disadvantageous for everybody. I had another thought. I'm losing it at the moment. But anyway, yeah, I 100% agree with you. And I think that, I'm an old school person. I would tell folks, hey, look, if you don't know what something is, and sometimes I even have to use it myself, I go to Snopes.com. That's my go-to thing. That's the one that I've been going to for decades, and it's been there and continues to be the goal.
That's liberal. I seen it. I seen a thing that said it's a liberal page.
Exactly, and that's precisely what they're trying to have you believe, that Snopes is this, part of the deep state.
Fake news.
You know what I mean?
It's the deep state, and I've seen it on the news.
Logan's mimicking family right now.
Yeah, he's in middle America, so he's detoxing right now.
I'm triggered. You talk about Snopes.
Yeah, and the Bible does say that we have to, examine everything and retain that which is good. So we're called to be discerning more than anything, and I think we should just take that advice. That we don't necessarily have to shield ourselves from all of it. We need to kind of have a vague knowledge and understanding of what these conspiracy theories are, because again, the only way to combat and to fight back is to just with truth. The same as this is a First Amendment principle. Maybe Mike has heard it, that the reason we don't let the government ban misinformation outright is because the way you fight lies, the way you fight falsehoods, you don't fight bad speech with censorship. You fight bad speech with good speech. Yeah. With better speech, with better discourse. And that's the way to fight these things, is with more truth into the world, not by clicking the button and having all these folks go away. Although I must confess that I'm 100% in support of private companies, not the government, shutting down or deactivating crazy people's accounts if they feel like Alex Jones, for example.
Alex Jones is,
yeah. Facebook making their own decision.
If private companies want to ban crazy people for whatever reason they deem necessary for their business and for the health of everyone else, I'm all for it. It's a little weirder when the government does it, but yeah, when it's private companies, hey, go for it. Yeah. So yeah.
I did want to jump in real quick before I know, Cristian, thank you. You're even over the time you said you'd spend with us, but I did want to make maybe a quick comment on a couple of the issues that we have been talking about, and then maybe move into that last question, Jordan, before Cristian leaves us. But one of the things I was interesting, actually, a colleague of mine from Andrews, Steve Yeagley, works in our student life department and also teaches in the seminary. He shared an article in the comments, which if you're on Facebook, you can see, just scroll up to that comment, which talked about how conservative Christians in particular are much more susceptible for misinformation and disinformation. And one of the things that the article talked about, and it's really interesting, the author followed both a small group, a Christian small group, as well as a group of conservative students on a higher education campus. I forget which one right now, but she talked about how when she was interviewing the students and these church members, 100% of them, so basically all of the people that she interviewed, they talked about how the primary source for their fact checking was Google. And I think one of the issues today is that there is a fundamental maybe misnomer about the existence of Google and why it exists. Google in and of itself is not there to fact check you per se. Google's actually incentivized in helping you find what you want to find. And so it's all based upon the keywords you're putting in, the search terms, the things you're trying to look for. And there's this idea that if I can find a link to some article on the internet written by whoever, which says what I wanted to say, then I can throw that in my group chat. I can throw that in the Facebook comments. I can text that to that person or private message them before they block me to try to counteract what they've been saying, just because Google, spit out a link to me which says what I wanted to say, and I'm not scrolling down further for anything that says anything different, because it's pulling up similar results, not giving you a cross section of perspectives. And so, right. And what they did in the article was it compared, and the reason why they said conservative Christians are so susceptible to it is because it very much mirrors the way that we proof text arguments for theology and religious doctrine. And, it's not about, what this person says or that person says, but if I can find this verse, which my particular camp has interpreted this particular way, and I can just throw that up against your interpretations all day, and I don't have to move off my position because I found a proof text which says what I wanted to say in a vacuum. And so therefore we could just agree to disagree or continue disagreeing, and nobody moves anywhere. And so what's scary though, is that now people are applying that not to what they believe to be, the inspired word of God, but to a link on their screen on the internet, Google, as if Google's their God, And so I think if we don't understand or get to a point where there's some general understanding around how to find primary, reliable sources as opposed to just a link on the screen. We're going to continue to have, this back and forth, and we're going to continue to be susceptible to foreign governments or bad actors continuing to have us hurling, garbage at one another, and we're just not going to get anywhere productive.
Sure. Yeah. I know that I may have given perhaps private platforms too much credit with my earlier answer, but the reality with Google, with Facebook, with YouTube, with Twitter, wherever you have to sign up and put in information about yourself, these people have all your life in a database somewhere. They have a perfect picture of your moves, what you like, what you don't like. They have pretty much a data file on who you are as a person, and all they're doing when you're inputting information into these platforms is basically give them every data stroke into each of these platforms is more data that they retain about you and who you are as a person. And of course, in many instances, what you find, it will reflect precisely the kinds of things that you've been searching before. It'll be a huge echo chamber into ideas that you've already fed into, and nothing necessarily that will challenge those preconceived ideas and those worldviews. So of course, if what you find in some weird website that nobody has heard of confirms some of those word spheres, these sites are gonna spit it right back at you because they don't care. They don't care about necessarily you finding the truth and you being free from the truth, as the Bible says. They care about their bottom line. These platforms only care about making money off of you. And I don't mean necessarily you buying things off of the web, because many people don't necessarily buy things on the web, but just by you finding or giving them information that they can then exploit and sell to others and use against you. In that sense, Google is not your friend, Amazon is not your friend, Facebook is not your friend. Every single platform where you input information into, they just care about your data, and they don't care about your privacy. They don't care about your health or your mental well-being. They just care about how to use all that information that you give to them for free.
Yeah.
So that then they can monetize it and sell it and profit off of it. So do not use Google as a source for confirming information that you hear or that you find in an email chain. Always take everything that you read with a grain of salt and be very perceptive, because again, these sites do not want you to find truth. They just want to make money off of you.
That's good. That's very good. Honestly, I feel like we should just have you talk for the rest of the time, and everyone will just listen.
Can I say one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think people should also, alongside being very, be very suspicious of all of these tech platforms, is to, get involved and really, and I'm not going to tell you to go to law school. Please don't go to law school.
No, don't. Please don't.
but please do read up on these tech platforms. Get interested in how monopolies are formed. Be very suspicious of giving more money to Amazon, because that company doesn't have your best interest at heart at all. And just look for ways in which you can get involved and get your government to be very suspicious, the states to be suspicious of these companies. If there's opportunities to break them up into smaller parts, I think it would be even better. Just for many things, just think of all the companies or local little shops that are being ran out of business by all these giants that can, sell these other things for pennies, or to use.
Bernie Sanders has entered the show.
Yeah, or to use what almost amounts to. No, but seriously, think about ways that we can better just to improve the way things are right now. Because if COVID-19 has revealed anything about American society, is that there's a lot of messed up things with healthcare. There's a lot of messed up things with how people make their money, minimum wage, and think of all the things that people are struggling with right now. That's just the result of all the disregard that we have had for just regular folks. It's crazy that our essential workers essential, quote unquote, are people that we never ever stopped to think twice about before. But now we're calling them essentials and heroes, et cetera, when in reality, we never cared about them in the first place.
Right.
But they're truly the people that are sustaining us right now. These folks deserve more than just a little pat on the back and calling them heroes. They deserve a living wage, many other things. So I just hope that whoever's listening to this rant by me now, that they truly think more deeply about all of these things ailing our society. And that takes many of us to improve these things.
Amazing. Oh, go ahead,
Sorry,
AJ.
if I could just go off. I wanted to kind of touch on something that I was hearing a lot from, particularly, what Garrison was saying, and even what Logan touched at earlier with some of the things that Donald Trump has said, whether it's verbally or on his Twitter account. I think there's also like another aspect that I don't know if we have like fully wrestled with. I think we don't really realize or we may realize how dangerous right-wing media can often be to so many of our friends and loved ones. I remember I was watching this episode of John Oliver, and he broke down the Rush Limbaughs and the Candace Owens and the Sean Hannitys and the Tucker Carlsons. They bring in millions and millions of viewers every single day. And he talks about, this is John Oliver, he talks about how in the last 15 to 20 years, so many of these right-wing commentators and conversationalists on places like Fox News, they have sown doubt in places like science, politics, he said education, conversations that deal with polarizing topics like race, sexuality, immigration. And it's gotten to the point where we've seen that when Trump comes forward in his campaign and he says in 2016 that CNN is fake news, that resonates with so many people because Trump is simply reaffirming something that had been sown into them for decades. So now we've reached this point, like you said, where you've got this fact-checking website, but that is not seen as truth anymore. That is seen as partisanship. And that I feel like we're at this dangerous place now where you've got this giant right-wing company that is continuing to indoctrinize their viewers into thinking that nothing else outside of this channel will bring you truth. And whenever you hear something else, it is seen as propaganda. It is seen as lies. It's seen as liberal. It's seen as something that's being pushed from the left. And I think that's part of some of the danger that I've seen in some of my friends and family is that I don't know how to present truth to them without them interpreting it as something liberal, because it some of these things don't even have to be partisan. But I feel like when you've got this machine that's pushing out that right-wing agenda constantly, it's like, how are we supposed to fight against that?
Yeah, and I wish I had the answer to that. If I did, I'd probably start my own show and become very famous. It's truly heartbreaking, and there are testimonials out there. I've read an article or two saying how basically a lot of this right-wing infotainment machine, as some people like to call it, it's truly dividing families apart, and it's causing a rift between parents and children and aunts and uncles, and a lot of it is generational, as I said earlier, but it is truly hurtful to actual families that honestly cannot see each other, not even across a dinner table, because of these differences. And when and I would suggest, again, it's not foolproof, it's not the be all end all, but if you can, if people can have a frank conversation with people that they love, and be like, hey, I can't believe that a news channel is driving us apart, and to get people to think about that, the implications of that. I hope that would spur some change. I know I've had similar conversations in my personal life, and it can be touchy sometimes. It's not an easy subject to broach. But again, the idea is to always be very well read, to always maintain the composure, to never raise your tone of voice, to never get agitated, because the moment they even sense that your blood pressure is kind of going up, and you're getting defensive about things, and you should, because again, some of this stuff could be life or death, and it could be really meaningful to folks. You can be passionate about it. The problem with passion is that sometimes it can get the best of you. So you always, as much as possible, ask the Lord to give you wisdom and to keep your cool about these things. I have been able, not so much to change people's minds, because that's very difficult, but sometimes to diffuse a conversation. Sometimes it is better to walk away and to preserve a relationship than to, cause more damage to getting into these protracted fights.
Was he raptured?
He was elevating us.
It's Russell.
Yo, he out.
It may have happened. I don't know.
Oof.
He's gone.
Oh man,
I'll tell you.
Yo, that's crazy. They kicked him off. He was like, "Yeah, we'll kick you
he
off."
was speaking too much
website.
truth. Huge thank you to Cristian.
Thank you so much, Cristian. Sorry for the untimely exit, but we really do appreciate him being on the show. We did have a question about systemic oppression and how misinformation is currently fueling our current power structures, those structures that are oppressing Black and brown people in this country. So since Cristian isn't here, we're going to have to Voltron up. I don't know if you guys have seen the show. It's a great show. Voltron up and try our best to engage on that topic.
Shout out Donnell. Hashtag taken.
I think Cristian might actually be back.
Oh, good.
So we can get a better goodbye. Hey, bro.
Hey guys.
There we go.
Yeah,
He's back.
He froze on us.
Sorry about that. I don't know
good.
what happened, but I think that you may have moved on to another subject. But anyway, just to finish the thought that I had before, just ask the Lord to arm you with patience, to arm you with the words. In the end, I think the most important thing is to bridge gaps, not to divide us further. So just be well read up, ask for wisdom, and then just impart truth whenever necessary. You don't have to impart truth all the time or to get the last word.
Yeah, you don't know how many times I delete my Facebook comments. I'm like, I typed it all out, and I'm like, never mind. Let me just have a good day. Especially if it's before 10 a.m., I'm deleting that comment. I don't have time to be in that all day long, just battling with somebody and them not listening to me. It's miserable. But
no, yeah, it's time consuming, and if you saw my Twitter drafts, you wouldn't believe so many things that never get tweeted. Because again, a lot of times you don't need to, put your thoughts out there. So just in the end, think about your own well-being and that of the people that you love most. And 9 times out of 10, you don't have to post that comment or that response to someone else's comment. So
9?
Anyway.
I'm saying like 7 or 8, but whatever.
Yeah, maybe. But hey, hopefully this has been a helpful conversation. Thank you guys for inviting me. And it's been really cool to get to spend this afternoon with you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Bro. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks a lot.
Best.
Bye.
So once again, thank you to Cristian for coming on Affirmative Interaction. We're just going to now quickly pivot to how systemic oppression is fueled by misinformation. Then after that, we're going to do a slight debrief of what has happened with our time with Cristian. Anyone jump in when you can.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there's like an obvious, we talked about it a little bit in 2016. Donald Trump literally got elected on the narrative attacking brown people on our southern border. Build a wall, build a wall. He did it for a year of election. I know that it was very clearly, when you talk to people that fight the undocumented immigration fight, they say Black Lives Matter paved the way so that they could feel that they could actually voice their thing. And we've seen this misinformation calling, Mexican immigrants, undocumented immigrants, rapists, thieves, like this narrative spread by the president, which then is spread through the camps of his followers. I mean, I think we could talk about systemic ailment on that level time for hours, and how we're still seeing it in our political spectrum. And then we talked about guys like Tucker Carlson, who literally pushes this narrative that white culture is some superior culture that's better, greater, and should be the one deciding factor for everything, which is just like, I mean, that conversation, there's puppets, there's presidents, like it's really deep for sure.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna, talk about the way in which disinformation or even misinformation is fueling systemic oppression, you can look at American history and see the way that disinformation has informed policy, and policy fuels oppression. I mean, to determine scientifically that Black people are genetically and biologically inferior beings leads to the policy that determines that we are, 3/5 of a human being. It leads to the way in which the Black community is policed, because we are scientifically, at the time, determined to be savages and brutes. So, a long. Oh, there it is. My headphones died. So disinformation has had.
Man, devil busy, bro. Devil busy today.
Tommy Lauren is busy right now.
He is so busy. No, but I mean, I think you get the point. I mean, I think Logan brings an excellent point of the way in which disinformation in the modern era has been used to talk, like to paint this negative picture of immigrants, when we know that immigrants are a self-selecting group, that they benefit the country that they go to because they have the determination to do so. Like, we know that they benefit our country, and yet this misinformation and disinformation has led us to let some people to conclude that immigrants are somehow a nuisance or somehow terrible for the country. It's obvious that it fuels oppression in some very direct, tangible ways.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of that and maybe even bring in a comment from Esther. Shout out to Esther. I love this comment here. Yeah, Adrian. Shout out.
She's single.
Literally no.
Absolutely not. But yeah, oppressed people already have a historically founded mistrust in systems, and that actually, it's interesting. I listened into a webinar today on the topic of hate crimes. And in this webinar, they were talking about, and I'm not going to say the locale necessarily. I mean, y'all know where I live, but it was a webinar on the topic, and they had folks at the federal level, state level, local level, and someone was running through the data, and she was very good. And she talks about one of the more alarming things about hate crimes is that based off of the studies that they've done on the occurrence of hate crimes, only 3%, it's estimated, are even reported to the local police level. 3%.
Wow.
And so during this webinar, the constant frame was like, well, because there are people that are part of like local nonprofits and community action groups and things like that on the webinar. And so you have these law enforcement folks from the different levels saying, we need more reporting. 3% is too low. You got to encourage folks to report these hate crimes. And I submitted a question in which I just posited, could it be possible that you're only seeing 3% reporting rates of these crimes because there's no trust that local, state, or federal law enforcement will actually do anything about those things that you're reporting? It is distrust and mistrust in some way a factor in the reality that these things just go underreported because the assumption is just, well, you know, these things have happened, they continue to happen. We talk about, you know, social media, we see them on social media, we see it on the news, we see these things happening, and no one's held accountable for them. And the mis and disinformation about Black and brown folks and other minority people groups, which it, you know, imputes them with faults in all these different scenarios, which therefore means that their lives can be taken, their lives can be degraded, they can be locked up, whatever the case may be, because of these embedded beliefs we have about, well, it just must be their fault. And so after a while, when you're a part of that community and you're receiving those messages and you're seeing it happen to you and those around you, you start to say, well, you know, I'm just going to try to figure it out on my own. They're not doing it for us like they say they would, or that they're doing for other people. And so why should I just automatically trust that things are going to be different for me just because it's me, when I see it happening to everyone else in my community?
Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Man, Nixon,
go ahead, Adrian. That's good.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, I think it also reminded me of, I remember Jon Stewart making this great point that you have these places like conservative outlets and right-wing media that have a tendency to oversimplify some of these more complicated issues surrounding race, surrounding sexuality. And when you oversimplify it, so much prejudice comes out of it. When you look at police brutality in a specific neighborhood, spreading that misinformation by oversimplifying the complexities surrounding it, it just further pushes the prejudice on those particular people. Because now you've got this group of people that say, well, if they had just stopped running, or there's more violence in this neighborhood, then none of these problems would exist. And I think that is also part of the concern that I've seen with misinformation, is that it prohibits us from having proper conversation, because the right information that is needed to have a proper conversation is never there. The way that people are being framed on the concept of race or the concept of immigration is so poorly given, but they don't even realize that they've been misinformed on these topics, and that there's always this constant disconnect that happens in those conversations.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I see it a lot because, you know, obviously the most misinformed people that you're going to deal with around race, Black and brown people, are going to be white folk, of course. But like, there's so much interesting realities within that conversation, and it's only interesting because it's true, not because it's like it's good. But you know, the conversation of race, we'll see them misinform these people about Black and brown people, saying that they're this or that. You know, they'll push the stereotype that they're negative, that they're negative, that they're negative. But then you'll see those same voices that just misinformed that group, and they'll tell that group, and they have nothing to complain about because we have equality and the ability to get, you know, pull ourselves up by our bootstraps. And so then you'll see these people and they'll say, what are they complaining about? It's all misconceived, like they're believing this about themselves. And I hear that all the time, where they're like, you know, the oppression that the Black and brown people believe in is fake, right? Like that's not real. They're making this up, their victim mentality. It's this continued push. And I'm always like, wait, so I don't understand how people could say, like, I'm gonna get information negatively about these people, and then also from that same person get information that's going to tell me about what their life is like and how, and it's like, wait, how did this person become an expert for you to not only make you hate them, but also make you like think that they're equal to you in society? And it's really ugly, for sure. But really, if any of y'all want to speak to that like idea a little bit, I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay, so if anyone wants to comment on what Logan said super quick, we can, and then we will transition to PMI to close out.
I know I kind of slightly cut off Garrison there. I did want to give him a chance if he wanted to cut in there and make a few points.
No, I mean, you guys have really touched on all of it, you know, in your own way. So, I mean, I just appreciate what has been said. I mean, I think just kind of drilling back down, coming off of what Nick said, Black and brown people have every reason to distrust the medical community, to distrust the system. That's also coming off of what Esther said and what Dave is kind of talking about. We have every reason to, and yet it is imperative that we don't in these times, which is just such a really tough dichotomy to navigate. But I mean, stereotypes are one of the most pervasive forms of disinformation, white supremacist disinformation, especially stereotypes about Black and brown people. And acknowledging and recognizing that, we realize that policy is born out of that, and the system perpetuates itself. So yeah, I just love what you guys are saying on this topic, and I mean, I think it's super important. So thanks, Mike, for bringing this up.
Sure, and I do want to just real quick before we transition say, one of the things that I've been trying to step into as a person of color is understanding, and I'm going to try to do this really quick because I don't want the idea to come across that we're framing this to say that the problem in and of itself, is white people just for the simple fact that they are white. There's a difference between being a white person and the socio-political construct of whiteness and how that has been used over time to oppress people. And one of the things that I've been coming into an understanding of is the reality that as a Black person who has attained a certain level of privilege, whether that's, not necessarily economically, because I'm broke as a joke, but, whether that's through educational or being a male, that as well. The levels of, working at a higher ed institution, which, I'm in the single digits of men who look like me that are doing that. I mean, the low single digits, and understanding that there are very easy and subtle ways for me to move into the place of becoming an oppressor or participating in the system that can continue to oppress those who look like me, or especially women who look like me, who have not been able to attain into these spaces. And just by sort of being quiet and being safe, quote unquote, whatever that means, I can very easily participate in whiteness. And so that is something that we all have to wrestle through. We all have to understand, how has the construct of whiteness impacted the way we see ourselves, the way we as Black people see white people, the way that we interact with one another, the way that we have conversations around the topic. We have to be really careful in assuming that folks are even aware oftentimes how they are operating to perpetuate the belief in a hierarchy of human value, which is at the root of all of this, and which can be propagated by anyone.
No, and that's excellent stuff. I think we could probably talk about that for forever. There's so much in there, and I sense Jordan like, we must move on. So I don't want to keep on there. But
you can hear that feedback. Unmute. Yeah.
Okay. Unmute. I just want to make sure we don't go over time. So thank you all again for this discussion. It's been incredibly valuable to me, I will say, and hopefully it was valuable to our listeners as well. We're going to close out with PMI. That is discussing what has piqued my interest, meaning your interest this week. That could be a book, film, movie, music, TV show, or anything in between. We'll start with Mike.
Sure. So this definitely piqued my interest last, what was it? I guess it was, last night, Monday night, or Sunday. When did Last Dance come on? Was it Sunday night or Monday night?
Monday night.
Monday night.
My bad. What is time? What are days? That's what piqued my interest recently. But no, watching episode 3 and 4 of the MJ doc, The Last Dance, being further and further convinced that he's the GOAT, but we're not going to go there right now. But in episode 3, they're talking about Dennis Rodman, and there was this interesting nugget in which they looked at what looks like on the surface Dennis Rodman. He was on the Pistons. He showed up like really late at night with with his gun in his car. And so there was a kind of an interesting mental health question there around that whole story. But what piqued my interest about it was the next day I was watching an interview, not an interview, but Bart Scott and Alan Hahn, they have a radio show on ESPN New York. And Bart Scott, of course, is the former linebacker for the Jets. And he's from Detroit. And he was talking about how the interesting subscript to that whole story is that there's a rumor, and now he said it, don't come from me. It's probably, you could probably Google it. We were talking about Google. But what he said was like, what actually happened was that a teammate of Dennis Rodman's, Vinnie Johnson, was having some inappropriate contact with Dennis Rodman's wife at the time. And so
that's pre-texting. That's like a phone call.
So Rodman was apparently about that action, and he showed up basically in the middle of the night waiting for a man to show up early the next morning to take care of business. And of course, that never really got out in the mainstream media at the time. Rodman pretty quickly got traded to the Spurs, like right after that incident. They didn't really talk much about it, but it kind of helps because for folks at the time, because I wasn't really around at the time, so for folks at the time it was kind of confusing because he was a key part to the Pistons team, and of course the team that won the 2 chips, before that time period. And so they were wondering why they kind of gave him away for not much, but definitely want to look more into that story. So that piqued my interest.
I like how you said for sure a linebacker for the Jets. Like people know who linebackers for the Jets are.
I meant to say former. That was probably a brain fart. My bad.
I'm like, bro, I don't know any Jets linebackers, but
I barely do. They're trash. So but they weren't trash when he was on the team. I'll give them that. Can't wait and all that.
Very good, Agent. Can you go next for us, please?
Yeah, man. I think one thing it's a show that I think is somewhat popular amongst
you gotta get a new one.
Black population. Insecure, season 3, I believe, or season 4. Season 4 started. There's a lot of commentary that takes place throughout the entire series so far. But I think one of the biggest things that I just kind of had a moment realizing when I was watching the newest episode of just the ability to have something on one of the biggest platforms in HBO that is just kind of centered around Black women. I think it's been a while since we've had something like that. I know there are shows like Girlfriends that I think was very successful, but to have it on a platform like HBO, I just don't know if I had seen that, and obviously in the era of social media, to have so much conversations happening around different people, I think that was just kind of refreshing to see. So definitely something I recommend.
Very good. And I believe Insecure is on HBO streaming. Logan, can you go next for us, please?
Real quick before Logan, my thing with Insecure, because I haven't watched an episode. Black Twitter, please don't drag me. So my like little stick with Insecure is to try to figure out what's happening in the shows just from reading Black Twitter. So that's literally my whole interaction with Insecure. I don't know.
It's so entertaining, bro.
Yeah, and just reading the comments is entertaining. And I'm not even seeing anything. I'm just seeing how people are describing it and like, oh, okay. Yeah, so I feel like I watch it, but I don't.
I don't even think they meant to create that aspect of it, like the Twitter interaction. It just kind of grew out of it, and it's part of it.
I think the writing reflects it a little bit now, because like this last episode was, and I was going to talk a little bit because that's one of my favorite shows too. But like this last episode when you thought Issa.
No spoilers.
We can't spoil anything.
No spoilers.
Anyway,
broad summary.
Okay, so anyways, it's Tuesday. It's Tuesday. If you ain't watched the show yet, but anyways, I won't spoil it. But it is interesting how early in that episode you'll be like, wow, I'm kind of liking how this is rolling, and then later on you're like, dang. now I'm disliking the whole ideas of some of the things that are taking place. And I feel like they do that now more than they did in season 1, because I actually restarted season 1 because season 4 is reflecting on season 1 a lot. So I wanted to kind of, but yeah, I think they know that Twitter be out there about it, and they want, they want us to talk about it. But for me, I bought this book back months ago. It's called Suicidal, by a guy named Jesse Baring. As a person that's like struggled with mental health and has also been in situations with myself, with family, where suicide, I mean, I'm not saying that I've attempted or anything, but this has been a conversation that's kind of been in my life a lot. I kind of wanted to dig deeper into it, and I bought this book maybe in November, and it kind of found its way on my shelf just because the holidays hit and I forgot about it. And I've enjoyed it. Like, it kind of touches into, it's basically this psychologist. I bought it in y'all are annoying in this chat over here. I bought it in a bookstore. They have a bookstore in Berkeley. It's a press, university press bookstore. So everything in the bookstore that they sell is like by professionals. Like, they don't sell anything that's not written by someone that's an expert in the field, which I love. So I can go in there and kind of peek around. And so like when I dug into it, this is a psychologist who's kind of talking about his experience in life and growing up as a closeted gay man, and just like what it looked like to want to take his own life, but then also what it looks like to help people not want to do that. It really kind of digs in deep to some of the concepts of, and one of the things that really stuck out to me as I was reading this week was this thought that the person that knows you better than anyone, like the closest person to you, they don't even know 5% of how much you know about yourself. And I really like that, because it really starts to make you realize that, you know, you are your biggest like knowledge base, you're your biggest fan, you're your biggest supporter. And I'm excited to kind of dig back into it and kind of, you know, use this time off to get, you know, maybe in line with not only my mental health, but hopefully like helping other people see kind of the importance of their existences. But yeah.
Right.
And very good. Quickly, Garrison, could you end for us, please?
Well, Jordan, I don't know if you have one. I don't know if you're going to share.
Yeah, bro,
I'm going to make sure you have some time, but I will go next and you'll end, I hope. But okay, so this is the book. I'm glad we're on this mental health wave. Going to keep going with that one. The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health by Dr. Rita Walker. She is absolutely amazing, and I'm super excited to get into it. I just got it yesterday. It comes out on May 1st, so shout out to the devil, aka Amazon, for getting it to me quickly. So I have it a little earlier. But the really cool thing about this is, I mean, the title describes it all, but we're also having her do a virtual seminar at my church in a couple of weeks.
Wow.
And everyone's invited. So
that's what's up.
Very good. And I'll end with a book recommendation too, which has been very helpful for me in my journalism, my work in trying to become a full-fledged journalism, graduate from budding. And it is called Sound Reporting. It's the NPR Guide to Audio Journalism and Production. It's by Jonathan Kern. He is a long timer at NPR, and this book is incredible in teaching you how to chase a story, how to edit, how to interview, everything. So I recommend it if you're into this kind of thing. And that is it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for listening to Affirmative Interaction. We hope to see you here again next week. And please, for the love of God, don't go outside. See you next time.
Peace, everyone.
all right, y'all.
See y'all later.
Bye.